They said she was born under a red moon and that anyone born that night was marked by the devil. They said she could talk snakes out of their skins, that she could charm a man's soul straight out his body, and that her footsteps made crops wilt. But most of all, they said she laughed when men died. Her name was Marjorie, but on the plantations of Nightshade Row, she was called the Widow, not because she ever had a husband, but because every man who tried to claim her ended up in a grave. No one knew her true age. No one knew where she came from. All they knew was that she had been sold 3 times, escaped twice, beaten once to the edge of death, and still lived with a smile like she knew something no one else did. When the Klan began rising in the Louisiana parishes, burning crosses and dragging people from their cabins, they should have left the widow alone. But hatred makes men stupid, and 8 Klansmen were the stupidest of them all. They tried to teach her a lesson. They wanted to break her. They wanted to make an example out of her. By sunrise, all 8 would lay dead in the dirt, clutching their throats, eyes bulging, while the widow stood over them, laughing like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for justice. This is how it began. The night the Klansmen came for her, the air was so still that even the frogs held their breath. The cicadas fell silent. The swamp birds tucked themselves into the trees. It was as if the whole world sensed the violence creeping through the woods. Marjorie stood in her small cabin, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. Her hands moved slow, calm. Her smile was faint but steady, like she was listening to a joke only she could hear. A soft knock tapped at her door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice smooth as molasses. A young boy's whisper answered, sharp with fear. "Miss Marjorie, they comin'. 8 of 'em. Horses too." She didn't look afraid. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. When she opened it, she saw the boy trembling, sweat beading across his forehead despite the night chill. "Where are they now?" she asked. "Crossin' the cane field. They got ropes, guns, torches." Marjorie bent down, cupped the boy's cheek gently, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Go on home. Lock your mama's door. Don't look out the window. But go," she said. And when she said it, he obeyed. The moment he ran, Marjorie straightened her back and inhaled deeply. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of whiskey, sweat, and arrogance. The men were getting closer. She went to her table, lifted the cloth covering a wooden crate, and removed a small bottle of deep red wine. The glass was old and cloudy, but the liquid inside glowed like garnet in the lamplight. Her smile widened. "Been savin' you for a special night," she whispered. Then she placed 8 pewter cups in a row. The Klansmen stopped outside her cabin with the loud clatter of hooves and boots. Their hoods glowed pale in the moonlight. One of them kicked her door so hard it shook on its hinges. "Come on out, witch," he snarled. She opened the door slowly, so slowly it unnerved them. She did not bow. She did not tremble. She stood in her doorway with her hair loose, falling over her shoulders like a black waterfall. "Evenin', gentlemen," she said sweetly. "You thirsty?" Her politeness confused them. Stupid men always slowed down when they were confused. "Hear you like threatenin' folks," another spat. "Hear you like talkin' to the devil," said a third. She shrugged. "If the devil comes knockin', I won't be rude." Laughter rippled through them, harsh, mocking. That was when she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. No reason to stand outside like stray dogs. Their pride outweighed their suspicion. They marched in, filling her cabin with the stink of sweat and cruelty. She poured wine into each of the 8 cups with slow, deliberate grace. "Drink," she said. "If you're gonna kill me, least you can do is toast to it." They roared with wicked laughter. The men raised their cups. Some knocked them back in one motion. Others drank in small sips, savoring the sweetness. But sweetness is a strange thing, especially when it hides something darker. Within 60 seconds, the tallest man's face twisted. What's wrong with?" he gasped, grabbing his throat. 30 more seconds and a second man fell to his knees, choking so violently his hood ripped open. The others panicked. "You poisoned us," one shrieked, eyes bulging. Marjorie leaned against her table, arms crossed, smile wide enough to show every perfect white tooth. "No," she said softly. "You poisoned yourselves." They thrashed. They gagged. They clawed at their necks until their nails split. She watched calmly, head tilted like she was evaluating a painting. Then, when the first man collapsed, gasping his final breath, she laughed. Not cruelly, not wildly, but joyfully, like a woman finally free. By the time the eighth man fell, the only sound left in the cabin was her soft humming, a tune older than the land, older than their hate. She stepped over the bodies and walked out into the moonlight. 8 down, she whispered to the stars. Plenty more to go. The next evening arrived with a strange stillness, as if the air itself held its breath. Cicadas buzzed, a lonely rhythm rising and falling across the quiet pines. Lila set her hand on the old cedar table in her kitchen hut, feeling the grooves carved by 15 years of chopping herbs, mixing remedies, grinding roots. But tonight, she was grinding nothing. Tonight she was waiting. Word traveled fast among men who believed themselves powerful, faster still among cowards who hid behind sheets. By sundown, Lila knew. The men responsible for Samuel's death, the ones who had dragged him into the swamp and left his body for gators, were coming. Not with ropes this time, not with torches, but with thirst. In grief, they sought comfort. In guilt, they sought numbness. They convinced themselves they came to her cabin for wine, for distraction, for the novelty of a widow's company. But Lila knew their nature better than they knew themselves. Men who killed at night liked to pretend in daylight that they were civilized. The moon rose round, swollen, watching. Footsteps sounded outside, heavy boots scraping dirt. Lila didn't look up until the first white hood dipped below her doorway. 7 more followed, one by one, ducking into the smoky warmth of her hut. They kept their masks on, as if cloth could hide their stench. Lila kept her face calm, her heartbeat slow, her breathing steady. None of the men noticed the faint shimmer of something oily on the wine jug's rim. "Evening, widow," the tallest one said, trying to sound bold. "Heard you were lonely." She smiled, a small, soft, tired thing. "I've been lonely a long time." Laughter echoed off the low ceiling, rough and barking. They spread around the room, filling her space with the bitter scent of sweat and gunpowder. One man leaned so close she could smell stale whiskey trapped beneath his hood. "We brought silver," another said, shaking a pouch. "You pour us a drink. We forget we ever seen your face." "Then drink," Lila said gently. "Drink, and forget everything you ever done." She poured the first glass, the scarlet liquid glinting under lamplight. Not too dark, not too light. Perfect. She handed it to the tallest man. He lifted it beneath his hood and swallowed deep. "It's strong," he coughed. "It's homebrew," she murmured. "A recipe from my mama." The others eagerly held out their cups. One by one, she filled them. One by one, they drank. And one by one, something subtle shifted, barely visible yet unmistakable to anyone who watched closely. The tall one leaned against her table. "Widow, you gonna pour yourself a drink, or you just watching us?" Lila's smile widened, a slow, blooming thing, almost tender. "I don't drink no more." "Why not?" he slurred. "Because when I drink," she said softly, "I remember too much." The smallest of the men stumbled. His hood tilted sideways. What was in? He didn't finish. His body lurched as if someone pushed him from behind, though no one had moved. Another man laughed nervously. "Y'all drunk already?" "We barely had a cup." Lila stepped backward, her shadow stretching long across the floor. She had not poisoned them. Not exactly. Poison was too quick. She had brewed something else, something old, something her grandmother whispered about while weaving charms to keep spirits from stalking the door. It wasn't meant to kill outright. It was meant to unhook the mind, unravel the senses, peel men down to their trembling, frightened cores. A man dropped to his knees, clutching his throat, though he could still breathe. Another clawed at his hood as if invisible hands tightened around it. The tallest one staggered forward, grabbing Lila's arm. "What did you do?" She leaned close, her lips near his ear. "I gave you what you gave my husband." Confusion flickered in his eyes, then horror, then recognition. One by one, their bodies rebelled. Muscles twitched, voices cracked. The room filled with groans, curses, desperate gasps for clarity. Their legs buckled, their masks slipped. Fear split open their bravado like rotten wood. "You ain't dying," Lila said calmly, watching them collapse like men who'd been starved of mercy. "Not yet." She lifted the jug again, swirling the dark liquid. "The drink don't kill fast. It kills slow. First your sight, then your breath, then your heartbeat." Her voice was whisper smooth. "But before that, it makes you see the truth." The man on the ground convulsed. "Truth? That Samuel never begged," Lila said. "Not once, but I hope y'all do." Their limbs spasmed. Their voices cracked. The hut trembled with their suffering. Lila stepped outside, letting the night wind cool her skin. Behind her, the men shrieked, some choking, some praying, some calling for mothers who would have been ashamed of them. She looked up at the moon, glowing steady and white. "Samuel," she thought. "They're startin' to pay." But she didn't smile yet. Not fully. Not until it was over. And it wasn't over. Not for another 8 heartbeats. Not for another 8 deaths. The screams inside Lila's hut tore through the pine woods like the wails of dying beasts. Owls went silent. Even the wind seemed to shrink back. Lila stood outside, leaning against a rough post, arms folded calmly across her chest. Inside, chaos rattled the walls. It started with frantic thrashing boots, scraping the floor, chairs overturning, men clawing at anything solid as if the earth beneath them had liquefied. Then came the choking, the ragged, wet gulps for air. And beneath all of it, the sound that chilled even Lila. Laughter, not hers, not free laughter, but desperate, broken laughter, the kind that erupts when men finally see the monsters hiding inside their own ribs. She could hear them shouting names, each man calling out to another, as if someone else in the room might save him. But their voices tangled, slurred, screamed over one another until they dissolved into pure panic. Lila waited. She had learned patience young, when to speak, when to listen, when to remain as silent as a blade. Tonight, she held silence close, like a shroud. After a while, the tallest man, the one who had spoken boldest, crawled to the doorway. His hood had fallen off. His face was flushed, his eyes wild, reflecting flame and terror. "Widow," he gasped. "Help. Help us." Lila stepped forward slowly, her shadow falling over him. "You want mercy," she said, "but you ain't got the stomach for justice." He tried to grab her ankle, but his fingers twitched uselessly. She pulled her leg back, watching him writhe like a worm on hot stone. "What did you give us?" he begged. Lila knelt beside him, lifting his chin with one finger. "You remember 4 nights ago," she murmured. "The swamp, the lantern light, the screams." His lips trembled. We were drunk. "And Samuel wasn't?" she snapped. The man squeezed his eyes shut, as if he could block out the memory or her voice. "What I gave you," Lila continued, soft as river mud, "ain't poison. It's a mirror." A shudder rippled through him. He tried to speak, but only foam touched his lips. Inside the hut, one of the men shrieked, so loud the walls quivered. Another's voice broke into a hysterical hymn, half prayer, half delirious plea. "Why, ain't you drinking?" The tall man choked. Lila's eyes went distant. "Because I wanted to stay clear enough to watch every one of y'all go." A hot tear slid down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. He fell onto his back, limbs jerking. His chest rose, heaved, then stalled. Lila placed a hand over his heart. Slow, slower, stopped. "1 down," she whispered. 7 left. Inside, the second man collapsed beside the fire pit, his face purpled, his breath throaty and shallow. Lila dragged his body with a surprising steadiness. Her grief had given her strength she didn't know she possessed. She laid him beside the tall one, then went back inside. The hut smelled of sweat, fear, bile, and smoke. The men moved in disjointed jerks, like marionettes whose strings had been cut but still twitched from memory. One had torn off his hood and was clawing at the air as if swarms of insects crawled over him. "They ain't real," Lila said, stepping past him. "That's just your conscience buzzin'. Must feel strange to finally have one." He tried to lunge at her, but his legs buckled. He hit the floor hard. By the time she checked his pulse, it fluttered like a moth's wing, then faded. 2 more staggered against each other, clutching their throats, their voices merging into a grotesque duet. "You think y'all strong," Lila murmured, watching them sink to their knees. "But strength ain't what a man shows when he holds a gun. It's what he shows when he meets the truth." One collapsed, then the other. Lila did not move, did not flinch, did not blink. Outside, she dragged them into a row 4 bodies, each stiffening under the moonlight. Sweat glistened on her brow, but her breathing stayed even. Halfway done, back inside, only 4 remained, and these were the worst of them. She remembered their voices from the swamp, each one dripping with cruelty. One man was sobbing into his hands. Another crawled toward the wall, as if escaping through wood was an option. The third was praying again, now louder, beseeching a god he had ignored his whole life. The fourth, the dirtiest of them, still had enough venom left to spit. "You're a demon," he growled, though his words slurred together. Lila approached him calmly. "Maybe, but demons don't create themselves. Men do." He tried to swing at her, but his arm fell limp before it reached her. He collapsed, breath rattling like wind through dead leaves. Within seconds, he stilled. 3 left. The praying man crawled toward her feet, gripping her ankle. His eyes were watery, his lips trembling. "Forgive us. Lila stepped out of his grasp. "You prayed while killing Samuel too," she said. "Didn't stop your hand then. Won't stop mine now." He gasped, convulsed, and went still. 2 left. The sobbing man clutched at her dress. "I didn't hurt him," he cried. "I just watched." "That's worse," Lila said simply. His chest seized. Then silence. 1 left. The final man, the one crawling at the wall, was the quietest. Fear had stolen his voice. He clung to the wooden boards as if he could melt into them. Lila approached him slowly, her footsteps soft. "You ain't fightin' the drink," she said. "You fightin' the memory, 'cause it's comin' back, ain't it?" The way Samuel screamed. He froze. His breath hitched. His fingers dug deep into the cracks. "Say his name," Lila demanded. He shook his head. "Say his name." His voice cracked into a whisper. "Samuel." Effed. Then he convulsed violently, collapsing to the floor. His heartbeat stuttered, then faded into stillness. Lila stood there, watching the last of the 8 bodies settle into death's quiet. Slowly, her shoulders dropped, her breath softened, her eyes glistened. "It's done," she whispered. But somewhere inside her, something darker whispered back, "Not yet." The sun rose pale and sickly the next morning, its light creeping reluctantly over the pines, over the silent clearing, over 8 bodies lying in a row, still, stiff, and strangely peaceful. Birds circled above but did not land. Even scavengers approached timidly, sensing the human scent still clinging to the air. Lila stood before the corpses, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. For a woman who had just orchestrated the deaths of 8 men, she looked neither triumphant nor shaken. Instead, she looked hollow like a drum whose skin had been stretched too thin. She stared at the bodies as though waiting for one of them to rise and tell her this nightmarish world was finally done with her. But none did. A crunch of leaves behind her made Lila turn sharply. It was the last person she wanted to see. A slender girl stood at the tree line, barefoot, wide-eyed, clutching something pressed to her chest. Her hair was braided neatly, but her clothes were worn thin. She couldn't have been more than 17. "Ruth," Lila whispered. Ruth had been Samuel's youngest sister. She had Samuel's eyes, dark, quiet, observant, always seeing more than she should. Lila's breath caught. She hadn't planned for this. Ruth wasn't supposed to be here. The girl stepped closer, her gaze glued to the bodies. She swallowed hard. Is it true? What they said?" Lila clenched her shawl. "What did they say?" "That 8 Klansmen came into the woods last night." Ruth's voice trembled. "And ain't nobody seen 'em since." Lila exhaled, slow, careful. "What are you doing out this far, child?" "Ain't safe." Ruth hesitated. Her next words came out like stones falling from her throat. "I heard their voices last night." She pointed toward the hut. "Screamin'. Sounded like the end of the world." Lila's jaw tightened. Ruth looked at Lila then, really looked, reading her face the way Samuel used to. "You did it," she whispered. Lila closed her eyes. They hurt Samuel, the girl continued. And you made sure they paid. Lila turned sharply. I ain't do it for vengeance. Then what? Ruth asked softly. Lila paused. Her voice came out hoarse. For peace. Ruth looked over the bodies again. Does it feel peaceful? Lila didn't answer. Ruth moved closer and slowly dropped the object she'd been holding. It hit the dirt with a soft thud, a folded shirt. Samuel's work shirt, patched at the elbows. Lila's breath hitched. You kept it, Lila murmured. Ruth nodded. Mama wanted to bury it after what they did. But I couldn't. Lila knelt and picked up the shirt, clutching it with both hands. It still smelled faintly of smoke and pine tar, the scent Samuel always carried after long days splitting timber. The weight of the shirt alone was enough to bring tears she had long buried. Ruth spoke again, her voice barely audible. I came to find you last night, but when I saw the men go toward your hut, I hid. Lila's head snapped up. You were here? Ruth nodded, trembling. I was up in the trees. I saw 'em knock on your door. Heard 'em laughing. Then I heard you laughing. Lila stiffened. Ruth, I ain't judging, the girl said quickly, but I heard everything. Lila swallowed hard. The air suddenly felt heavy. Ruth stepped closer until she stood directly in front of her. Those men were demons. Everyone knew it. You just did what the sheriff never would. Lila shook her head. This ain't something you praise, child. Why not? Because death sticks to the soul. Lila pressed a palm to her chest, and I can feel it sticking to mine. Ruth's eyes glistened. So what you gonna do now? Lila looked around at the clearing, the hut, the bodies, the trees still standing silent witness. I'm gonna move 'em, she said finally. Burn the hut. Make sure no one finds nothing. Ruth nodded slowly. I'll help. No. Lila's voice was sharp. You need to go home. Ruth didn't move. I ain't leaving you. Ruth, Lila whispered, you still got a future. A good one, if you don't ruin it by standing with me. The girl trembled. But you're all I got left. The truth of that hit Lila deep, far deeper than any blade could. She pulled the girl into her arms, holding her tightly, burying her face in Ruth's hair. You got more future than I ever did, Lila murmured. Don't tie it to my ghosts. Ruth pulled back, eyes wet. I ain't scared. I've not a 2-3. Lila cupped her cheek. You should be. But before Lila could say more, the distant sound of hooves thundered through the trees. Both froze. Ruth's eyes widened. Someone's coming. Lila's heartbeat leapt. Get in the trees now. Ruth obeyed instantly, climbing the nearest pine with nimble speed. Lila stepped forward, standing tall before the row of corpses, Samuel's shirt clutched in her fist. Hoofbeats grew louder, too loud. Not one horse. Several. Lila's pulse hammered. The men who came would not be like the 8 lying dead. They would be sober, armed, enraged. The first rider broke through the trees, a deputy's star glinting on his vest. Behind him, 4 others followed. They froze when they saw the bodies. And Lila, standing before them, unarmed, unmoving, unapologetic. The deputy lifted his rifle. You got 3 seconds, he warned, voice cracking, to tell me what in God's name happened here. Lila inhaled, slow, steady, like she had nothing left to fear, because she didn't. They came here to kill me, she said. And they failed. The deputy's eyes widened. The others cursed under their breath, and in the tree above, Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth, praying Lila's next words would not seal her fate. But Lila had already stepped forward, her voice clear, calm, and fatal. And if y'all came to finish what they started, I'll let the Lord sort out the rest. The deputy kept his rifle leveled at Lila's chest, but she didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe heavy. She stood like a tree that had survived 5 storms and wasn't about to bow for a 6th. Behind her, the bodies of 8 Klansmen lay in a crooked row, pale in the morning light. Their faces frozen, their throats stiff and dry, their lips stained by the poisoned wine they'd drunk with laughter. The deputy swallowed and shifted in his saddle. Don't you move, he warned. Lila didn't. Wind rustled through the pines. A few leaves broke loose and fluttered down like bits of burned paper. The forest felt tense alive, like it was holding its breath with her. Another rider, a thick-necked man with a red mustache, nudged his horse closer. "Deputy Price," he muttered, "that there is Widow Lila. She ain't no danger. The danger's layin' dead behind her." Lila turned her head slightly. "Then you best lower that rifle." Price hesitated, and in his hesitation, Lila saw the truth. He was terrified of her, not because she was armed, not because she was threatening, because she wasn't afraid of dying. Men like Price didn't know what to do with someone who had nothing left to lose. He cleared his throat. "We got reports of hollerin', scream." Lila cut him off. "You want the truth, or the story you came ready to believe?" The other riders exchanged looks. Price frowned. "The truth," Lila nodded once. "Then listen." She stepped a little to the side, revealing the bodies fully. Sunlight hit the men's faces, faces that had terror etched into them like carving marks. "They came here drunk," Lila began. "Came knocking on my door after midnight. They told me I was going to pay for living alone, pay for speaking out when Samuel died, pay for breathin', far as they were concerned." End quote. The men shifted uncomfortably. "Samuel was one of us," the mustached rider muttered. "Didn't deserve." Lila whipped her gaze toward him. "You think the men who killed Samuel were strangers? Outsiders?" Her voice dropped into a soft, venomous whisper. "They were these men." Mustache reddened. "You sure of that?" Lila lifted Samuel's patched shirt. The fabric trembled in her hands, but she held her voice steady. "Samuel wore this the night they hunted him," she said. "I found it torn by the river. These men bragged about it, called him an uppity boy, laughed about the way he ran." Price's jaw tightened. His hands twitched around the rifle grip. "They bragged about killing him," Lila continued. "And last night, they came here to brag again. Thought I'd cry. Thought I'd beg." She tilted her chin. "I gave 'em wine instead." A silence fell so thick and heavy it felt like fog sinking into the lungs. Price finally spoke, voice hoarse. "You poisoned 'em." "I gave them a choice," Lila corrected. "They drank it." One of the younger riders looked sick. "Why? Why would they drink wine you gave 'em?" Lila shrugged softly. "Because they were men who thought they couldn't die." The truth of it sent a murmur through the group. Price lowered his rifle just an inch, but enough for Lila to breathe again. "Even so," he said quietly, 8 dead white men. That ain't something the county's gonna overlook." Lila nodded. "I know. Folks'll call it murder. I know. Some'll call for a hangin'. I know. Then why'd you do it?" Lila finally looked him straight in the eye. "Because I'd rather die free than live in fear." Price froze. The men behind him averted their eyes, the words cutting deeper than bullets. A soft rustle came from above. Lila didn't dare look up, but she knew Ruth was still hiding in the tree, watching with trembling hands over her mouth. She prayed none of the riders noticed. Price sighed heavily. "Lila, the sheriff'll want to question you." "I'll come peacefully," she said. "Ain't runnin'." That surprised him. "Why?" "Because if I run," Lila murmured, "they'll burn every colored cabin from here to Montgomery looking for me." Silence again. The mustached rider cleared his throat. "Then, let's take her in." But Price didn't move. His eyes scanned